And we're back. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Cyber Guys podcast.
It's been 84 years.
It has been a little bit. We took a bit of a brief hiatus. Some things look different. I'm in the middle of moving offices. I got a haircut. Things look a little bit different. But nevertheless, in today's episode, we sat down with a special guest who gave us some insights on the application of cybersecurity in the international realm. But before we get to that, I want to make sure we go through a couple things really quick. If you like our episodes, if you're coming back, double check, make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you hit that little ring icon. Make sure you like the episode. And if you're coming here for the first time, welcome. I know you're going to like it. And at the end of the video, if you do like it, make sure you go ahead and subscribe and hit that like button. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump into it.
I'm absolutely thrilled that we have joining us today Monica Price. She's been working in the international community for many years doing cybersecurity at the World Bank, and has really built up a clientele of international customers. So she has a lot of insight into some of the issues and the hurdles on doing what we do, but with the various different regulatory frameworks and international law and the local characteristics. So let's just give a warm Cyber Guys welcome to Monica Price. Monica, so glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Welcome to the show, Monica.
Thank you. I'm really excited.
All right. So I gave a little quick blurb, but please tell us, how did you get into the international side of cybersecurity?
Well, so first I probably have to tell you how I got into cyber, which was by accident. I've always been kind of a techie, but I got laid off. I guess this must have been about 25 years or so, out of a job that I was doing more like the medical stuff. And someone said, why don't you go and, apply for this job working for the World Bank? And I was like, I don't want to work for a bank. And I think what I knew about that job then was probably very little. I thought it was a bank. So I started working for them doing help desk tech support. So that's how I started, understanding how technology works and things like that. And I remember some of the first viruses that really hit the World Bank were these boot sector viruses. And I mean, I still have like Melissa on a floppy disk back in the day. I have this collection of floppy disks. My kids don't have a clue what that is. But so I started to be like really intrigued with that. Nobody had virus scanners. It was really new. This is like ancient history, before we were like really sophisticated. But what I found was that the biggest challenge back then and even now is this multicultural sort of organizations where we're talking 20,000 people that are spread across the globe and, really barely speak English. They don't varying degrees of understanding how computers work, sometimes in areas where their connection to the internet world is like phone, you know what I mean, in some remote area and sometimes satellite. So I was intrigued by the challenges. I'm not really a true white black hat person, not really. I'm probably more like a technocrat. I love technology. So, so that's kind of what spurs me. And I am excited when security is done well so that we can use technology for what we need to use it for. But so that's kind of how I got started. And I've loved it. I've been at the World Bank, the IMF, the funds. I've retired since, and so I own my own consulting business, and I have about 15 nonprofit UN-esque clients. So, but it's the same types of challenges. And I love it. I enjoy it. It's good stuff. Scary, but good stuff.
That's exciting. It's funny. On the show, we've had some great guests. One of our guests was someone who worked with the Justice Department prosecuting cyber criminals. We had another guest who basically teaches threat hunters how to do packet analysis. So we like to approach cybersecurity from all different angles. Right. So when I'm thinking about international cyber, it's funny. I'm really thinking about how do you deal with the cross-border implications of cybersecurity awareness. For instance, you can't just take a solution from the U.S. and then implement it in Burkina Faso. I mean,
no, you cannot.
What are some of the challenges that you've observed in just the uh, international barriers, for
So
lack of a better?
I think the obvious ones are like physical barriers to start with, right? I mean, there are places where there is no real good um, legal infrastructure to say who owns what side of what border. So, like a physical border. So, there are times when, the work these UN groups do to go in and help refugees or whatever, the first thing is who owns the technology and where are you? I mean, like I've been involved in projects where they send drones out to try and delineate where the physical boundaries are. And that's before you talk about the laws that they may or may not have governing what's cybercrime and what's not cybercrime. So, I mean, that's probably like an extreme example of it. But it's also that, the laws, it's definitely most of the rest of the world, they like to take their lead from the US. So they like to look at NIST standards and they will do their version of GDPR, right? So the UN organization is exempt from a lot of the US centric regulations. So they're not beholden to GDPR, for example. The UN has their own framework that they use for privacy and data protection. That's right. Most people don't understand that. And they do mimic a lot, but they have to make allowances for multicultural variances of it. Um, and it's not just the technology is a challenge. So, like you mentioned, how security is like holistic. It has to be a holistic because you're dealing with cultures that will create risks that you would never even have thought of, like in the United States of America. So, if the culture is to not be on film or to not take pictures for, like, I've been some places where I've been told put the camera away because there's some evil spirit in it. Like, it's really think about so how do you secure that? And then if we talk about like the UN organizations, they don't really have trade secrets. Their biggest risks are reputational ones. They have secrets for sure. They have some really scary ones, but they're not trade secrets. It's not like their business model. That's their differentiator. If something goes wrong, they're gonna have access to the private secrets of some of the different countries that are party to this, UN family. So there's also that
That's interesting.
that makes it
That's
challenging.
interesting. That kind of brings up a question because I've become aware of the fact that when it comes to compromises to security or even crime in the nonprofit community, there's a greater fear of reputational risk. Just as example, I know of a situation where um, someone was embezzling funds from a nonprofit, and rather than risking that information uh, getting out, that their donations were being stolen by an insider, they just quietly fired the person and moved on and didn't want anyone to see it. The same thing kind of happens in cybersecurity, where the fear of their breach being seen by others is greater than really their their concern over what was actually breached or what was actually compromised. Is that something that you were kind of alluding to there?
So yeah, so that's very true. I think that's probably true outside of UN organizations and inside, depending on what is stolen. And if your business is high tech and you're Amazon or something, you really don't want to talk about breaches. But definitely in nonprofit, that's very true. They it wouldn't surprise me to hear stories that people were not, that information that was published was not brought forward, but quietly handled. There's a lot of different types of risks. So we talk reputational risk, but if I could just like bring that down to what that really means.
Yeah,
So
great.
some of the international organizations, for example, they're responsible for taking care of refugees, and those locations are highly secret, right? So there's times when you can't divulge where refugee camps are or where families are for political, and physical safety reasons. But they have phones, right? And they have Facebook, and they have, so I mean, just imagine your eyes are opening. So, like, imagine what that would be like trying to manage risk of that nature, and where families sometimes are one
Everybody
place.
has geolocate on.
And so that's just like, like really one example. But then on the back end, so like at the business level, how do you explain reputational risk? Like, financial risk is already, I mean, could sit here and argue with you that a lot of that's quantitative, qualitative stuff is subjective already. That's before we talk about the risk of my reputation that I can't put a dollar to, right? But the organizations are accepting risk often that they don't understand. They don't understand the value of the reputational risk. They know the risk to their jobs, right? And maybe their families and their, if they lose their job, but do they really understand? And sometimes they're taking risk on behalf of the organization. That's reputational risk, and it's really hard to quantify. So, like, those are just some of the challenges, and I think it's what I like best. It's not just straight techie stuff, although I do love techie stuff, and that's kind of where I started. I did malware investigations and stuff like that. Was my before I realized that it was a little bit better for me to work on the preventative side, or try to work on the preventative side, than the side that keeps you up half the night, fixing problems. Uh, I do virus team in 24 hour, and I just got old and said, let's let some younger people do this, do this stuff.
Yeah, right. Gotcha. So it's kind of interesting. You come with a wealth of experience there. Well, give us a war story. Give us one of the more interesting things that you've come across. Obviously, we'll avoid any specific names or anything like that, but just a scenario that you saw that was interesting.
So I've got so many, and most of them I can't tell you. I can tell you. I guess I can tell you the ones that were on Fox News, because they were on Fox News. Um, we have had so the World Bank, for example, operates more like a university than a business, right? So they gather a lot of information. Their mission and their mandate is to end poverty. So which is huge and ginormous and unwieldy. To over 250 member states. I think that number is correct. That it changes. But there was a time when we walked into work, all of us did, and there was Fox News and CNN, and like we didn't even understand what was going on. We were just sort of, accosted, and it was, we understand that there's this big, huge, ginormous leak that happened, and all of this information has been put on some, I'm going to say South African, although I'm pretty sure that's not correct on purpose. So South African website, and all these details are leaked. And it was the first time that, for me, I had ever seen high executive people walk. Like these organizations, they operate, we call them dinosaurs for real, because the people that work there for many years. I was there for 22 years before I retired. But most people had been there their entire careers, and they moved from other countries. So they are here with their families. They're embedded in, in the United States. So losing, jobs and things like that, that's like a big thing. That's all uprooting. So I would say that was probably one of the worst working days ever. Everybody's covering themselves. Nobody's at fault. We're not getting anywhere with what the actual problem was. So, I mean, I guess that's not like really horrible, but for me, I remember that clearly. Those days were terrible. It was like a week. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody. We had police escorts in and out of the IMF building, and so for me, that was like a big eye opener to what could really happen. And like I said, these UN and the nonprofits, they house so much information. I mean, if you look at the news right now and you're looking at what's going on, for example, in Russia and Ukraine, UN organizations are the ones that are going in and they're saying this nuclear facility is now safe. There's a lot of sort of scary things that could happen if we're not careful.
Yes, absolutely. Now, it's interesting. Something I always notice and always think about when it comes to um, major incidents like that is, it makes for strange bedfellows, so to speak.
Okay.
When we're in the cybersecurity business, we want to prevent those things, but typically those sorts of events are a boon to our business, because that's the
It's
only
what's
time
necessary.
everyone wakes up and says, "Oh,
Correct.
this is actually something we really need to put on budget. This is something we really need to give more attention to.
Correct.
This is something that we can't just sleep."
Yeah,
So it's kind of a weird, relationship
it is.
between
It
those who
is.
want to prevent and those who are causing it. We actually really thrive in environments where they do what they do.
Well,
If,
it's a tightrope. There's a tightrope balance to it, because what I will say is, and I say this when I get to speak about cybersecurity, if it's done well, I've been in organizations where it's not done well at all. It's just a mess.
sure.
And I've been in organizations where it's done almost textbook. Those are really interesting ones. But when it's done that well, nobody hears a thing. It's when there's a problem, right, that you actually understand there's something going on. So I will agree with you. And I'll tell you the other thing I learned. I do a lot of coaching of CIOs, especially ones that come outside of the UN infrastructure into nonprofit, because there's a shell shock for them. So I'm really good at introducing them to how it's a university like environment and that sort of thing. But one of the things that I always talk about is how important it is to not try and get around audits, to not try and, you sometimes it takes a really bad incident or exposure to get something fixed. There isn't anything better for a budget, a CISO's budget, than if there's a hit somewhere. Then all of a sudden they want to buy insurance, they want to lock the doors, they want to, they don't want to do personal devices, So you usually get, and I teach this, I really do. I coach. What's the last horrible thing that's happened? Let's talk about that. If we're going to go and talk to the committees to get funding, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how bad it could have been. Let's expostulate what that would look like had you not had these controls in place. So the teaching side of cyber is instrumental, if you're clever, in making sure that your front face with the executives isn't always bad. And you can leverage and use the sort of the proactiveness of the last thing. It also works well if you take, some other organization that got hit bad and yours didn't. Talk about the controls you want to put in place, and sometimes you can get buy-in.
Yeah,
So those
that's
are
actually
always,
something. Yeah,
yeah,
I agree with you completely. That's actually something that I use.
yeah.
The old expression, "Experience is your best teacher." I always like to twist it and say someone else's experience is your best teacher.
Your best teacher,
Mhm.
So
absolutely.
if we can capitalize on what's in the news and what's an event of something that happened, some other CIO or CEO that got fired because of negligence in their cybersecurity
Yeah,
precautions, then that's actually definitely something.
yeah,
What are some things that you like to do? Because some countries definitely have a more regulatory framework mindset, and other organizations, they don't really have a lot of regulations in their country, and their whole background is just do whatever works. So how
right.
do you help to foster uh, a a cybersecurity mindset with some of your international customers that may not necessarily come from that way of thinking?
So I embrace that. So like, I mentioned, I said at heart, I'm really a technocrat. I think technology is amazing, and where technology and security mesh, the space where they mesh, I need to give that like a Techtopia, I need to like can a phrase, but what I mean to say is like so for example, when authentication, when passwords started coming out way early on devices, and we were doing passwords, and I had my Palm Pilot or whatever, I remember we were talking about biometrics then, and people were saying crazy things like, you're going to find out I've got diseases by scanning my eyes and all that. They were just totally against it. But as devices and the technology started to improve, people didn't want to be bothered with remembering passwords. Suddenly, biometrics was a savior. Same thing they were fighting about. So, you look at the way the work needs to get done. Most of these organizations, the cyber folks forget the business has to go on. And in some cases, you can't do tons of restrictions. If we say nobody's allowed to have mobile devices, half of the African clients can't work because a lot of them, that's the only way they can connect. So my advice to say is, okay, so how are they working? What are they doing? Let's try and support the way they work with security. And if we can mesh it with our infrastructure, then that works well. I like frameworks. I'm not sold that they work on a real level as much as I think, I think they're necessary because everybody won't behave themselves and and do with, the right thing. There's always these rules come, but I also know that when you layer them in, people will teach to the test. They will do a lot of, let's do what we need to do to get past this audit, to get this certification, et cetera, when the real heart of the problems don't really get addressed. So I would say, if you've got a mobile workforce and they like the tools they like, let them use the tools they like. Set up MDM or whatever you need to do to try and make it more secure. Teach them that, their physical safety may be on the line or something like that, but where you can give them the people work really well when they can work how they work best, and not that we try and fit them into the mold. And so that's why sometimes I think the frameworks, can be not counterproductive is what I would say. So I do
You're
try.
really talking. Yeah, you're really talking our language there. I was just
Good.
having a Yeah,
Good.
no, I was just having a conversation with a customer just this morning about basically that same point. The idea of creating checklists and then having people just write to the checklist or build to the checklist is not actually security at all. We're ignoring the real thing in pursuit of paper. But so yeah, you're really talking
Yep.
our language. I mean,
Yep.
but you have to actually build architectural frameworks. You have to
You do.
actually build security architecture in the way you implement your technology to do it. We just had a recent conversation about bring your own device, BYOD,
Yep.
and you mentioned that to people that are used to a single, simple, one-way approach of
Yeah.
cybersecurity, and it's anathema. It sounds horrible to them.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at, okay, what does that mean? Let's take that incrementally. Can we implement more of a zero trust architecture that would allow for endpoint weaknesses
Right.
without compromising the overall system? Yeah, you can do that. You can build to the
Yep.
reality instead of
You
forcing
can.
the reality to some arbitrary rules. So yeah,
You're right.
you're talking about language there.
And also, and then take all of your money and hire the most brilliant security architect you can find. Not these ones that come. I mean, I'm not. I want to be clear, but there's a lot of them that's got these. They look real good on paper. Get a brilliant security architect. Brilliant. Somebody who cares a little bit about business too, because availability is part of security, and nobody thinks about that until there's like a website down or something. Suddenly we're all going, "How am I going to get
Yep.
paid?" You know what I mean? So I think
You know what?
brilliance. I work with some brilliant security architects, and they
Yeah,
are very, let's enable the business, let's understand it, and let's enable it. There are
yeah,
people who are bridges. I like to think of myself as in that space more than my value to technically do something, right? I can code if you make me, but I don't want to do that. I'm better at saying, what are you trying to do? And how do you like to do it? And let's build a security framework around that. And let's map it up to this framework and say, okay, this works. This is going to work. This is gonna really work. And I think that's just a better approach than
yeah.
others. But that's where I think you'd spend the money. These techs come and go, and right now it's, I mean, in the beginning these certification programs weren't there. I remember I got my CISSP because somebody said I couldn't, and then after that I couldn't have cared less about it. I just wanted to work. I wanted you to put me in front of a computer and let's work this out. But that's a whole other story. But I think security architecture is a really good place. Business risk people, that's where you spend your money on these people. They're going to save you a lot of heartache with this whole mentality that, oh, but the framework says, and I used to be an auditor for one of the top consulting firms. I've worked with the best there is. I really have. We brought them in. I've hired them. I've worked on projects with them. They come from really great schools. And then if you were to throw them in a real world problem, they would have trouble. They
Yeah.
would struggle a bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good argument against relying solely on frameworks in
Yes.
any space, because you often get people that are constructing operations to meet the checklists that fit the framework,
Correct.
and that impacts business operations pretty negatively. And we run into that all of the time,
Yeah.
where we have to balance, mission criticality, right? Getting somebody to do the job they're supposed to do versus actually securing the environment which they're trying to do the job.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one
It's
plug,
funny.
I mentioned the consultants, but McKinsey is also one of the big ones. I have to say this for them. They probably spent more time than I've ever seen any big consulting firm just understanding the business before they come in. Typically, these guys come in with their checklist. They haven't heard you. They don't know what the work is. They don't know. I will say McKinsey was good at that. So if you've got $1 billion to pay them to come in and work with you, I'm
Okay.
keeping it real, and they know. But
Yeah.
but other than
You,
that,
you know,
you're absolutely right.
yeah, it's funny. You said something that it makes me chuckle because I teach a lot of introduction to cybersecurity type classes or the CISSP certification course and whatnot. And so we always talk about the security triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it's funny, I always take a moment and ask my students, they're usually already cybersecurity professionals. I usually just take a moment and ask them, which of the three is most important?
Right.
Confidentiality, integrity, or availability? And it's
Yes,
funny,
the answer is
you'll have
yes.
people going on and on about integrity or on and on about confidentiality.
Everybody says confidentiality, right?
Almost always. Almost. And then I just ask a simple question. Who spends millions and millions of dollars just to hide the information? No, you spend millions and millions of dollars to access the information. Availability is the undercurrent of everything. Without
And it's
availability, there's nothing to make confidential or to maintain integrity on. So the idea of making the business impact front and center is so important, and it's so
correct.
often missed by a lot of cybersecurity folks. So
And it
again,
is, and it is a problem. It's the problem with, so I I spend time communicating with CIOs. The ones that are techies are difficult. I will tell you, the ones that come from the business that need to understand just like fundamentals of security and CIA and a few, they're easier to work with. The techies are harder to work with because their mind isn't, they're not, business people are just totally different personalities and they look at things differently. They look at challenges and problems and they look at opportunities. They're not looking at, all this restriction is what I'm trying to say. And it's really hard. You hire these cybersecurity people and it's difficult to have them understand, bottom line, the work needs to get done, or even like opportunities. So like what I was saying about about access, it's like there are opportunities we're missing here. If we say work how you want to work, we're looking to see, so we want to do classification. So for example, we want to put together a classification structure, but instead of saying, here's what we have secret, top secret, and this, turn on some DLP and take a look at what they're doing. Look at where the data is flowing. Look at what they're doing with what, then get a sense of how they work, then build your classification structure. That works better. It works a lot better than trying to fit things into the mold. Availability is hyper important in that instance, because what I've learned just from that my work doing classification schemas and data privacy is people are making everything super secret because they don't understand what the classification schemas are, because we threw it at them and we didn't first look at how they work. But we've got technology that can help us do that, to see where they're, do I need to tell them to stop forwarding stuff to their email? Are they even doing that? I mean, like those types of things, to kind of take some time to get to know what the business is doing. That's not really what techs do. And so that is a little bit harder to sell than getting a business
well,
person to talk about cyber.
techies are always enamored with technology. I mean,
We are.
it's give me a button, give me a widget. Give
That's
me
why they
something.
like confidentiality, because crypto is really cool. Like, I mean, really. I'm going to tell you, I didn't care about the rest of that test. I just wanted to do it. That's
Yeah,
cool stuff.
crypto is cool. It sounds cool. I
Cool.
mean, like I said, the word is cool. Crypto,
It does. You sound like you're a real serious black hat if you know crypto. But here's the truth of it. All these big incidents, go find the people person part. It's right in there. I sit and talk. So I listen. Like I said, I do a lot of talking, and it's always these tech people that come up, and usually some non-cyber person who wants to be cyber that knows something, and they'll challenge me. And I'm like, yeah, they did. That's really cool. Did you see that person that literally told the guy his password? Now talk to me about that. How do you stop that without an educated workforce, without people understanding the risk of, don't keep this guy's account open 8 months because he went home for leave and maybe he won't come back. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's happening.
That's where framework actually comes in handy, right?
Yes.
That's the kind of,
yes,
that's
absolutely. Yeah. It's an interesting field. I love it. I'm more enamored, like I said, with the tech part. AI is really exciting to me. I really want more time to sit and look at but I don't want it for cyber. I want AI to make my life easier, so like I don't have to think about things. It's like, I want access control that says, she likes to turn on her computer at 8 and listen to like Bon Jovi or something, and that's her. I like that kind of AI stuff. To me is kind of cool, and that's helpful to me.
Google's done that all day already.
I know,
Oh yeah.
Just open up YouTube on your.
I know.
You see
Yeah.
that they
What is it? 5 clicks? I think 5 clicks they can figure out exactly what user you are.
Right.
yeah
Or less. I
Yeah,
mean, we are like creatures of
5 or less.
habit.
Yeah.
Our brains are set up that way. So
yeah.
like,
Yep.
let's do that. Let's know that I need to order paper towels on Tuesday. Let's do that. Then I can spend more
Definitely
time
more
playing with
popular.
Mandalorian toys, or something.
Good stuff. All right, let's talk about something else
I,
though, because in your international work, you're dealing with all these different levels of uh, technology and technical infrastructure. I mean, what you have and what you can rely on in Western Europe versus what you can rely on in Sub-Saharan Africa is night and day. So, how do you broach those realities of technical differentials in the environments of your customers?
So first of all, I'm like a really good student. So I do tons and tons of research. So I will research what the local, like I want to understand not just what the guidelines that are applied to this particular area, but where those touch points hit the organization, like where that's going to really matter. And I do tons and tons of research. So I'm organized. That's like I want to tell you that I'm brilliant and I'm going to remember all of who's doing what. It's a lot to manage at times. It really is. I have to remember, do I talk GDPR or am I talking infrastructure of privacy data protection principles? Like I have to keep switching. So it's a challenge for me, but here's the nice thing. I can take the wonderful what's working from NIST and what's really working from ENISA or some of these other standards, and I can say, you know what they're doing over here? It's not part of your framework, but you might want to consider it. It works well. So I can bring, I can again be like a bridge and say, these are some principles that might work for you. Maybe we can do that and tie this into what you're already doing. But it's hard. It's hard to keep track of it. And then things are changing. I'm not a law expert. I do have friends that are brilliant in this. So every now and then I make a phone call and say, hey, you work with this group. What's happening there? Um, where it applies a lot, Mike, is in procurement areas a lot. So maybe not the organization, but the organization's interface with somebody's brother's uncle in an area that they need to build a bridge, and there's no real laws on business licenses or privacy, or there's loosey goosiness there about what is allowed and what's not allowed. And so how do you, and to be quite honest, there are many organizations that they don't have framework. I mean, they're not operating off frameworks. A lot of the NGOs are like that. They're 10 really zealous people that are trying to make something happen, and they're interfacing with a big group like maybe the IMF or the IFC or something, and they're trying to like get some water to some kids at a school, or something like that. So it's a challenge. It's just I'm
how do
diligent,
you?
studious.
And then that raises a really interesting point. How do you get around supply chain risk management in areas that are like that?
Um,
How do you actually address that?
you don't. So and if I mean that's
Be
you
honest,
don't.
yeah.
I mean,
That's the nature of it.
so
Yeah.
let me tell you, I think the biggest example of explaining supply chain risk was this pandemic. And it's a non-technical application to say, do you understand what happens when we've got all our eggs coming from this place and these 5 truck companies are all sick? I mean, that's something that I could use to explain supply chain risk. Sometimes you can't get around it. I mean, like there's nothing
Mm.
you do what you can. And like I said, there's a lot of business that's being done in areas where if you physically need to get into a place, it's literally somebody's uncle. Like I'm joking, but I'm really not. So, you like I said, you do what you can, but in a lot of areas it's just kind of like diligence. Um I also go back to really good people. I think we overlook good quality staff, and I know that it's really hard. I'm gonna put in my shameless plug for women right now, to say that when I first started in cybersecurity, I was the only woman of color, I think, at all in a team of about 20 for many years. And then women started to kind of get involved. But I think you need a varied mentality for security to work well, because the issues come up weirdly and not always in the structured way. And so, women and men think differently. We look at problems differently and we see risk kind of differently. So I also think that the people that are involved in running your cyber security should not all look like the same thing. They shouldn't all think the same. They should be thinking, wait, is this a single point of failure? If we're all putting, and there's a lot of it now, like there's 10 really big cybersecurity companies or tech providers that if something went wrong, what are all of us going to do? I mean, I know we're dispersed, but are we? So
That's something to think about. Well,
yeah.
I tell you, Monica,
That'll keep you up.
great. It's been really great having you
Oh,
on the
good.
show.
I'm glad.
Got to get you back, and more than just talking about your practice. Just talk about anything in cyber, because we talk about all things cyber on this channel.
Yeah,
so,
good.
Got to get you back. This has been great.
I appreciate it. It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. It's nice to sit and do shop talk. I don't get to do it. I enjoy shop talk. I do. So it's been wonderful. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to our special guest, Monica Price, for coming on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. We've got a lot coming out your way. And don't forget, stay safe, be secure, be sure. We'll see you next time.